one lump, and there's at least one person in this room that knows what project I'm talking about. And that project, it was done in a very traditional waterfall approach, and the UX was done in a completely separate team to the development team. At that point, I was on the development team. And what would happen is, say we were going to build page welcome, then we'd get the spec from the business analysts on what had to be on page welcome, how it had to interact to the back-end systems, etc., etc. And we'd get another document from the UX team on how it needed to look and flow and what the special colors and everything had to be. And about 70% of the time, we would go like, oh, well, that looks really hard to do, and so we're not going to do it that way, we'll do it this way because this is easier, and well, that blue looks weird and doesn't look right to me, so I'm going to do this blue.
So it really didn't matter because the project never launched.
Anyway, the point is there was just this huge disconnect between the UX team and the development team. And as a developer, I really didn't understand why it was important to have certain things in certain places. I've grown to appreciate that, if you happen to know. But what we're trying to do is bring that divide a bit closer.
So enter Agile UX. And what we mean by Agile UX is not this, which 90% of teams doing Agile UX are doing. And that's the UX team working one sprint ahead of the dev team. That's two teams doing mini waterfall.
So this is just mini traditional UX.
If you remember anything from our presentation, it's this slide. This is not Agile UX.
Those of you at the back, this is the most important slide.
Okay, so what do we mean by Agile UX?
So Agile UX is usually done with Scrum teams. Okay, so that's, hands up if you know what I'm saying when I say Scrum. I'm not bragging. Okay, good, great. Okay, so it's usually done by Scrum teams. It's a group of, let's say, 5 to 7 people that are working together to deliver working software as frequently as possible to customers. So it's a team. They work together on stuff. They don't work on separate things. It's not a bunch of individuals. And what we like to think about when we say Agile UX, that means the UX person or persons are part of this team, working with the team on the stuff that they're delivering that sprint, which means they have to work on super, super tiny slithers through the system. Not these huge UX designs that span websites. It also means there's a lot of collaboration happening between those people. The developer's sitting right next to the UX person, and I was part of the research that happened, so I know why the button needs to be that specific color of blue and in that position with rounded edges or not. It's also about getting quick feedback. So Agile is actually all about that feedback loop with your customer. So I'm going to build something and I'm going to test it immediately and get feedback. Does this work? Doesn't it? Should we try something different and work on that? So it's all about being iterative and delivering working software and feeding that with your customers.
So some of the reasons this works better than the previous mini waterfall is that if you're designing something to interact in this way and you've got a developer sitting right there with you, they're going to go, you know, that's really hard for us to do in JavaScript, right? You know that's going to be difficult and going to take 10 times as long. So then you can say, well, what would be easier? And you don't end up coming up with a design which is beautiful and tests lovely in the market with your prototype, and then you can't implement it. This is going to get you something you can implement a lot quicker. And so a lot of people say, yes, that's nice, but we have 5 Scrum teams and 1 UX person. So we actually I had a similar situation with this. Let the UX person join the team doing the stuff that's most related to that user experience. If you've got some guys doing back-end services that don't necessarily interact, let the UX person join the team. They're going to add the most benefit to each sprint. And they might move around, but rather have them working with that than handing off a deliverable that's going to be ignored.
Is there anyone in the room doing Agile UX? A few people. Excellent.
Is anyone brave enough to admit if they do the other version of Agile UX?
Thank you. 3 people, well done.
Okay, but this is not everything. There's also Lean UX, and I think Phil referred to it earlier. And this is, you might have heard of lean from lean manufacturing, and that's quite similar to Agile. That's not the lean we mean. We don't mean Toyota production system. We mean lean as in lean startup. Eric Ries's book. Anyone heard of or read Eric Ries's book? Cool. So we mean that kind of lean startup. And so the ultimate idea of lean startup is you don't build a product, you build a landing page where you capture people's email addresses. And if you get lots of email addresses, then chances are there's a market for the product. So only build it once you've got that. So what this says with Lean UX is, again, really, really small idea. Don't, prototype the idea, get it into a real product, put it in the market, and get that feedback from the users immediately. Not the stuff you can test in the lab. The stuff you can test with the product people will buy and use. The ultimate idea of a Lean UX feature is you put the menu item for the feature that you think people are going to want at that point in time, and when they click on it, you go, oh, we haven't implemented that. If you'd really like it, then let us know. And if you get lots of clicks on that button, you should probably build that. And if no one clicks on that button, delete it, because nobody needs that feature. So that's what we're talking about, really pushing it. And here, you're doing the simplest little thing to test your idea of the user experience before you build anything. And you're testing in the real market with a real product, not in a lab where you might get different results because you're paying people to give you answers. So Phil talked about this as well. It's about having a hypothesis. What can we test about this thing? How do we build the test? Then how do we put it into the market and get those metrics to decide if we should do it or not?
So we think that the sweet spot for Agile and UX is somewhere between the Agile UX and the Lean UX stuff, like right in the middle there. And this is a huge mind shift. I would go so far as to say most Agile development teams are still struggling with the mind shift of how to build really small things and get it out to the customers to get feedback soon. So for us to bring UX into that dimension as well, I haven't seen anyone in South Africa doing this successfully. So if you are, find me, because I'd like to see it. It is a mind shift, and you need to be kind to yourself, because you're probably going to fail at it the first few times you try it. It's very different trying to think of how you make one, not even a page, how you make one field on a page amazing and beautiful and useful instead of the entire website.
So most of the time when we talk to UX people, they go, but that's not possible. We really need to know what the whole picture is before we can create that. And I don't know enough about UX to know if it's possible. But I do know that architects had the same problem when they started with Agile. But we must do big upfront design, otherwise we'll have to change it. And analysts did the same thing. We must have the big document, otherwise we won't know where we're going. You don't know where you're going. You will do rework. That's okay. So other people have encountered this hurdle, said it was impossible, and now they've got past it. And I think UX is the same, but as I said, we can't tell because we don't do UX. But try. I'm sure it's possible.
So we're not complete novices. We have done some research. And we've also spoken to a lot of people internationally that are doing this. They're doing Lean UX, they're doing Agile UX, they're doing a blend of the two, and they're succeeding. I just don't think it's quite reached South Africa yet. So here are some tips that we think could help you. Tip 1. Oh, you were going to do this stuff. Oh, I can't do it.
I'll do it.
Okay.
So be part of the team, and here we mean part of the whole team, T-shaped people, cross-functional teams, all that goodness. We don't mean be part of the UX team and have the dev team over there. It's a bit like we used to have dev teams and test teams. Together, learn from each other. Same thing with UX and development teams. Together, you're creating one product together, and you're not handing over an interim artifact between the two, because you're just working together on the end result. Talk to them, sit next to them, learn each other's processes, engage and collaborate. Developers want to know what you do as much as you should be wanting to know what developers do.
Learn each other's language. Scrum teams have all sorts of funny names like backlog grooming and sprint planning and review.
Stand-ups and...
Understand what those things mean. At the same time, explain what your things mean. Explain what all those terms mean, because it's not obvious to everyone. Iterate your designs. So a lot of the research we've done has been around perfection, and it seems to be that UX people are always striving for perfection, like most humans.
They probably hate that there's spelling errors in your slides, by the way.
I'm so sorry. No, I'm totally lost. Okay. So anyway, back to perfection. We all want to be perfect, but what we have to realize is when we're doing something in a very small slice, you're going to do the best you can at that point in time. Then you're going to get feedback, and then you're going to do the best you can at that point in time. So it's never going to be perfect. It's just going to be as close as you can get in that moment. Refactoring it's kind of a development term, and it means that your code is going to be touched and reworked and re-looked at all the time. And the same goes for your designs and your layouts and how the user interacts with the page and the flow of everything. It's going to change all the time, and that's okay. You done with that, Samantha? Okay.
Just on that refactoring, I think we've already heard in UX that there's lots of rework with the designs. We're saying rework it once you've got feedback from the live product, not only when you've got feedback from the lab, from usability testing. Feedback in the market, change it, iterate like that. That would be the ultimate lean UX version. And then one of the things that we heard about being one of the most difficult things of trying to do Agile and lean UX is that you need to get users in to give you feedback and market and etc. And so the tip that Adrian Howard said for us, what they do is they have an ongoing recruitment process. So finding people to interview, finding people to do usability testing is a really difficult thing. But instead of booking them for a 2-week slot at some point in your project, they have someone finding them users every week. And they have users who are coming into their offices to do something every week. They don't know what something is until 2 days before, and the team will go, what's the best thing to use the users for today? And they'll just, well, we don't have anything to show them, let's do some interviews. Or we've got a paper prototype, let's stick that in front of them and see what they think. Or actually, maybe they can look at the last version that we shipped on Friday because we'd now like to see them actually interact with it. So have those slots available and then use them when you're going to use them, and you can decide at the last minute.
The story that we have here is there's a company in Joburg. Who here has got a decoder?
DSTV.
DSTV decoder thing.
Oh, they're better than we are.
So if you're in Joburg and it's broken and you go into the call center, you can stand the queue downstairs and wait for it to be fixed whilst you wait. And the development team sits upstairs from their call center. So what they've done is every week when they've done their sprint, they install their live software downstairs in these rooms, and whilst people wait, they can go into the rooms and play with it and give them feedback on what they think of the latest software. So
they don't even have to recruit users, they get them to come to them. And usually it's angry users too, because their things are broken and they're waiting. So good way to test your product. But this also talks to what Phil was saying about the number of hours your team is spending with the users. The great thing about this is if you're doing real Agile UX, it's not just the UX person who's been exposed to the users. Your whole team can be exposed to the users. The developers aren't too busy building what you spec'd last week. They're worried right now and they can look at what the users. So the info you're getting from users, your development team are seeing that same info firsthand. It also saves on that whole having to write a report that you give to someone that they don't read, because they're right there having the insights with you.
And lastly, as with everything, you need to read and do research. There is so much out there. I was pleasantly surprised at how much is out there. As always, it's the internet, so about half of it should not be out there, but it is. And you need to steer clear of that. Good luck. To help
They'll tell you to do UX one sprint ahead.
To help you, we've put together some links of things that were really interesting reading that we found awesome. And you just click on those links and read them if you go to the blog post. In South Africa, as mentioned earlier, there are quite a few UX groups that have started up and have regular meetups, and this is the first conference of its kind, so it seems to be a definite growing topic in South Africa. Adrian Howard's newsletter, we've also included a link to that. He's a lean UX specialist in the UK, and basically his newsletter includes every UX event that's happening worldwide and like 20 blog posts that he found interesting that month. So it's an awesome one-stop place to get more information.
Cool. So we know you're sick of like people talking at you. We know the third talk in a row. So now we want to hand over to you. What do you want to know about Agile and UX? Ask us anything. Yes. You're going to have to like speak loud or come grab a mic.
So what type of users are you bringing in for those weekly slots? You gave the DSCV example, but are you using guys that are actually already using the system sometimes? Or are you using people just straight off the street who know nothing about the system?
So however you do your...
The question.
Oh, sorry. So you guys can hear. What type of users are you bringing in every week? So DSTV are obviously using the people who are there because it's convenient. Usually what we're saying is whatever your recruiting process is now, so you might have identified the types of users you want. You want people who've never seen your product, or you want people who are active users and they do that. That same recruiting process can go in place. What you might want to do is bring in one of each type to test it because you don't know what they're going to be testing. So, but you still go through a recruiting process to bring those people in every week. You just don't know what you're recruiting them for, but they're still going to give you the same type of information. Does that make sense? Does that answer? Okay. Yes.
Okay, so I'll try and keep it short.
You run from me.
It is mine. Okay, so currently I work in quite a large corporate. I have spent a long time working with startups, so I'm used to being more on the lean side of things. So at the moment we're trying to get the current organizational structure to be more agile than as going from top down. But my question is, what is the optimal ratio you guys have found between UX designers to their team members to actually run in that middle space between lean and agile?
You can answer that one, Sam.
So my answer is I have no idea because I have never seen it working in South Africa. I have no idea. Repeat the question.
Repeat the question, Sam.
The question was, if you're doing this lean agile thing, what is the correct ratio that you should have in your team between UX developers and developers? And my answer was I have no idea.
Well, I have an answer based on a similar thing. We often get asked what's the ideal ratio of developers to testers in an agile team. There is no magic number. It depends on every single team. If your developers do lots of testing themselves, you need less testers. If you've got more automation, you need less testers. So I'm guessing it's going to be the same with UX. If your developers are UX aware and they have some of those skills, you probably need less people.
T-shirt people.
Yeah, if they don't have a clue and they're used to doing back-end work and they don't have any idea, you probably need more. But start with what you have and decide if there's a gap. That's what I would say. Have at least one. Start there. Anyone else? Anyone else? Yes.
You said that Agile UX works mostly with Scrum. Would it work with Kanban?
Would Agile UX works mostly with Scrum? Would it work with Kanban? Yes, definitely, because Kanban kind of works with anything. Kanban maps to your existing process. So as long as you have the UX person, it should map.
I would be careful with that. Often what we see with teams doing Kanban, I'm going to take the classic example, analysis, requirements, development, testing, people stay in their silos. So the analysts work in the analyst column, and the developers work in the development column, and the testers work in the test column. Kanban does not prescribe that you work that way, but people who come from that environment tend to do that. So unless you're putting effort in to have the whole team involved, I suspect you're going to look a lot like the sprint ahead if you just have a UX column at the front of your Kanban.
But at least you'll be working in really small pieces.
And I'll have a meeting together probably to at least talk to each other, so maybe it's an improvement.
It's a step in the right direction. Yes?
Can I run the mic?
I got a superhero.
Shell out voice.
Oh, she
she's got a loud voice.
Okay. Alright, so my question is like, when does the agile process start? Because at the company I work for, I tend to feel like I'm quite left out in the the account manager meeting with the clients sort of process where I'm like kind of clueless about what the project's about, and then we're just starting on sprint one, and I'm like, I don't even know what's going on. And I feel like I'm always like arguing with, the people I work with, and I'm struggling to understand it, or where is it supposed to start. And I'm always like, I should be there from the beginning, and there should be a developer, and I don't really know what actually is the right thing, but I always feel like I don't know what I'm doing, I suppose, and it makes me kind of like feel, am I sure?
And your role is as a UX?
I'm a web designer, so I pretty much,
Would you like to answer this one, Sam? No, because you don't have a mic. So I'll do ideal world. Sam can tell you what we see in practice. So ideal world is the agile project starts when someone has an idea and they get a team together. So like one day workshop, what is this thing sort of that we want to do, and what are the first hypotheses we need to prove? Whole team involved in that. The designers, the UX people, the testers, everything.
So does that happen like sort of before the sprint starts?
Yeah, one day before the start. We normally call it a kickoff meeting. And what you're doing in that meeting, so the fundamental thing, I'm going to use some Scrum lingo, sorry if you don't know what it means. You create this thing called a product backlog. It's just a list of stuff you want to do. All you need to do to start Scrum or an Agile process is to have enough work for the first iteration. So we usually, when Sam and I start teams, we spend one day with the whole team and the person who owns the idea, and we create just enough of a list for them to get started.
Okay, so we do that.
Yeah?
But like, I feel like in those kickoffs, they're like, no, this is just a kickoff, and we have to like know what work's going to go in. But somehow those tickets that are created, I don't really know I don't know the background behind those tickets, because obviously the project manager or the product owner is the one that creates them, I suppose. And then he kind of has a brief discussion, but it's not really in depth for the designer to know what I'm supposed to actually design, I suppose. And that's where I get quite lost.
Okay, so the question comment there was that they have these meetings, but when the tickets that the manager is presenting to the team doesn't really come with a lot of background or a lot of history, and so as a designer it's hard to understand where and what and why these things are there.
When do I actually have my time with them, so I know what I'm supposed to design?
So when do I have my time with those users who are requesting this work?
There's a magic meeting that most people who do Scrum don't know about. It's called backlog grooming. It's also called backlog refinement because grooming is a dirty word in the UK.
So honestly, I would say that the meeting you're in is dysfunctional. Sorry, I know, joking and all that, but take it as it's meant. It's probably dysfunctional because you should try and get the users into the room. You should be asking them those questions. If you're not getting answers to your questions, the very next day, that should be your first meeting. Before you build anything, you shouldn't be being told what the requirements are by a third party.
Yes, often if you can get access to clients, bring those into the meeting.
So we're just talking ideal world. I'm just quickly going to bring us back to real world. So in ideal world, that's how it works. It's wonderful. It's a magic land. It's unicorns everywhere.
We had to bring in the unicorns.
I had to say that. And this works really easily with the smaller your company is and the less people there are between you and the customer. In the really large corporates, think Sanlam, Old Mutual, the distance between you and that end customer, there's sometimes like 60 people between you.
And lawyers who won't let you speak to them.
And a lot of red tape, and sometimes this is just not possible. You need to figure out what your boundaries and limits are and try and do the best you can in those situations. It's not always perfect world.
So after often we say to people, get as close to your user as you can. So if you've got a call center agent who speaks to your frustrated users when they call in, when they can't do something on your website, bring that person into the meeting and get their feedback. If you've got people who go out and train your users, bring your trainers into those meetings. So you can get access people in your organization who are closer to your users. If you bring those into those kickoff meetings and your regular backlog grooming meetings, you can ask them the questions. And if they can't answer, then there's an action item, which is go find this out from the users and get back to us before we build it. We're not saying you should be building stuff before you know what you're building, but we're saying you don't need to spend 3 weeks finding that out. You can spend 1 day finding it out, enough to build that really thin slice, because you only need to find out stuff for that thin slice, build it, and then iterate.
Time check.
It's 12. What time are we supposed to be done? Oh, okay.
Well, then we can take more questions if you have.
At the back. Are you loud? No. Should have put my Fitbit on him. Oh, should I?
So is that?
Yes.
Is that coming through? So we're working on an app for a bank, and one of the things that we found in trying to adopt agile methodology is that agile can be ruthless to design, particularly when, and maybe it's just the way we are doing it, but the challenge that we have is when you start your sprint. So the first kind of UX that you were saying is the old way of doing it, which is kind of do your stuff before, so do a UX sprint or whatever it is, that one there, right? The challenge we have is that when we get into an actual sprint where the development work is going to happen, some of the stuff that we want to refine the design, we need to produce assets. You know, you're doing a thing for iOS, Android, you need to do it 4 times over and all of those things. Our ability to create those assets in the right time for that 2-week sprint to happen can sometimes be compromised. And sometimes because the rules of the sprint, we can't change stuff, there's not enough time. I don't know what your experience is in terms of kind of helping us to develop the right product, because we can have the Photoshop work, we can do all the wireframes and it looks pretty, but there is also design work in the engineering, which is to say, how do we make it look perfect across 10 different devices during the sprint, and if we need to adjust, how do we do that? I don't know what your experience is around such a thing.
Yeah, so Sam and I have the same answer. You're taking too much work into your sprint if you can't finish it, including all the steps you need to do. And so stuff is falling out of the front and you're getting interim artifacts ready before that. You're still doing waterfall, but in shorter iterations. So what you need to do is cut your stuff smaller, thinner slice, look up into splitting user stories. But we see this all the time. We see teams are like, well, we can't do everything in the sprint, so we have to do a whole bunch of stuff up front. Do less in the sprint. And in fact, if you ask agile people and they're like, well, what do you do if you can't finish stuff in a 2-week sprint? The advice is make your sprint shorter. Do a 1-week sprint, because then you'll be forced to change the way you work and do less and less and less until you figure out a process where you can do all of that on a small piece again and again. You shouldn't be doing some design, some development, some testing in a 2-week sprint. So it's kind of 2 days of design, 5 days of development, 2 days. You should be doing design, build, test on the first item in the sprint in day 1, and then you're doing that again on day 2 and again on day 3. So the fact that you make the sprint 5 days or 10 days is irrelevant if you get your process down that you can do it in such small pieces that you're doing it again and again and again, and where you arbitrarily cut off is irrelevant. But I suspect you're doing 3 days of design, 5 days of development, 3 days of testing in your sprint. Am I right? Sometimes. Story splitting. Look into story splitting. That is your friend. And there's lots of, if you go to our blog and Google story splitting, we've got lots of articles you can find. And some nice flip charts to help you. Flow charts.
Hi. It almost seems like you're saying there's no period where you kind of get to set the scene for yourself as a designer. So who are my users? Where do they work? What does it look like? What does it feel like to be them, to be in their environment? When do I create this empathy for my user when I start, design, data testing, and come out? And it almost seems like there's something lacking. And I think that was what's lacking over here as well. So there's this understanding of, who these people are and what they do and why.
Are you going to answer that, Sam?
Yeah, I'll go for it. So, go to the mind shift slide. So it's this. Okay? This stuff isn't easy. It's a completely different way of working. So you're right, there is no 2-week period, or I don't know, 1 month period where I sit, 1 day period where I sit with my user and gain empathy with them and understand everything that's going to make this an awesome unicorn product. But there is in Agile. It's just a lot smaller.
Well, and continuous. So it's not something you do at the start. It's something you do in little bits the entire time. Because that information you get at the beginning is probably going to change. So rather build into your process continuous contact with your users.
So if you do that 1 week, every week people... Sorry?
You don't have to have one without the other. First, it's like first, how do you start? You have to start somewhere. You have to start with users. You don't have to start with design. You start with...
So we agree, you have to start with the users. We're saying that just needs to be really short so that in that sprint, you're still delivering stuff to give to the user and get feedback on.
So maximum we spend a day getting to know that user
For a
before we
2-week
start, but it's not the only time you spend with that user.
I think it's much more likely that you'll get something out of that than trying to get users into a meeting. It's like, I don't know in which world that actually happens. So I think it's much more realistic.
Yeah, sure. So if you want to go out and meet your users before you start, but I would just take the whole team with you. Don't send the UX designer out. Send the whole team out to meet your users.
This guy...
Unicorns!
Thank you. Just to add on to that previous comment, I don't believe there's one approach to just say Agile UX. I think there's still a space for what you call traditional UX or Agile or the Lean. So like the scenario the gentleman now sketched, perhaps that's a more start with the traditional UX approach, and once you get into the development side, then you do the whole Agile UX. So my point is, I think there's still a space for all three that you have mentioned.
There's still a space for waterfall too. It actually works really well for organizing conferences. Yes?
Hold on, who's first?
Someone there and then Henrik.
Sorry, I just want to add on to, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to add on to what the gentleman... Okay, I'm trying. Sorry, man. Just want to add on to what those two gentlemen are talking about. Isn't that the whole point of Agile? Is just finding the best fit, what works for you. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, if you go the traditional UX way, is you don't have to have everything at the start. You can break it down. So let's say we've got an e-commerce site that we're building. We want to promote our products, so we break it down. How do we promote that to the users? So that little bit we take and we say, okay, we've got these scenarios. How does the user experience it? We've got registration. What's the best way to register people? You break it into little pieces so you don't have to get all the information in the beginning. You do it in little bits. And you can still do it traditionally, but you can combine it with Agile. And that's the point. If I understand it correctly, that's the point of Agile, is it's Agile.
So there's one big difference between Agile and traditional UX that I see, and that is that Agile doesn't consider anything except the working product as a measure of progress. So handing off an artifact, which is your design style guide for something, Agile says that's not done. It's only done when it's in the product and working and in front of users. And so you're only iterating on that thing. So the trap a lot of people fall into is they break stuff down into the UX stuff, the development, and the testing. We're saying don't break that way. Break it into a small piece of thing that you can get into the working product and users. And that's the fundamental mind shift, is not breaking it into small pieces vertically in your process. It's breaking it into slices. It's called a vertical slice, slices of your application that can go through your entire process quickly. Because having the perfect UX design when it can't be implemented is useless.
So she mentioned like looking at the registration process on the page. That is a thin slice through the system.
Yeah, but you would take that into development and to users before you started on the next bit. Absolutely, yeah.
Karen
Yes.
and Sam, thanks for this. one of the things that we started doing, and I was reminded of it when you talked about the kickoff meeting. When we do our Project Inception or Sprint Zero, we've got all kinds of names for it. We look at the personas involved. This is typical Scrum user story stuff, but just framing it in this perspective. Your persona. What the gentleman over there was talking about is, when do you look at the people who are using your product? And the personas that you use within your user stories are supposed to capture that. And I don't think we mine enough out of that information that we gather there. And even more importantly, that persona is generally a hypothesis. And we don't test that hypothesis. So that's one thing I think as the Agile community we can look into a lot more. And the other thing is the business reason for your user story. Why am I doing this feature? That is another place where the user is the prime candidate for testing your hypothesis. So I think in terms of, let me say, your task planning within your sprint, that is something that we can look at more concretely of how do you use those business reasons together with the personas when you do your usability testing, when you look at UX. I try to steer clear of saying UX design, because then people start thinking about graphical design. We shouldn't go there. But when you look at the user experience and how you're perceiving the user experience, I think those are two tools that are underutilized at the moment.
So I'm glad you brought up personas. So if we look at that kickoff meeting, what we would say is pick one persona, your most important persona, and do some stuff for that persona. So you might create that persona, go do some research, and do that one persona in your first kickoff meeting. Then have more persona workshops and create more personas to flesh it out as you go. But you don't need an entire set of 5 personas before you start. So that's what we're saying. Use the techniques, but small pieces of them, because they're wrong anyway and they're going to change.
I think UX comes in when you test, does that persona exist?
Yeah. But we would say test it with the product.
But also, I mean, let's be honest. Most Agile teams do an extremely poor job of creating personas. Extremely poor.
Well, they make them and then they put them on the wall and then they forget about them.
Yeah, and they're usually created by developers and they're making stuff up.
So they've never met a user.
As UX people, you need to help your developers. They are not good at this. Well, some are unicorns, but a lot of people struggle with this. And this is where you can really help the team to understand and empathize with the persona and the user and bring in real photos and stuff like that.
Just a little bit about getting your whole team involved in chatting to users. I can't remember the company, but some company does it like on a weekly or a monthly basis, where they've got a support center and they've got people answering the calls and stuff. But then once a month, they actually get the developers to man the phones and listen to the complaints that the users are giving in real time. So obviously they help them in either well if they're unicorns or semi-well if they're shy and introverted like most devs. But we've actually done that at our company, where we stick someone at the front desk, at the reception desk, and have them just listen to the kind of calls that come in. And it helps immensely in just the bigger picture and as well into the detail of them understanding what kind of people call, what kind of people are using the product, and then also helping them understand the finer details of complexities that people are struggling with. Like, you get 10 calls, everybody's complaining about the same thing. Suddenly you're like, geez, we really need to change that one thing. That's the next sprint.
And the great thing about doing that is developers also know, wow, 100 people are complaining about that thing, and it would take like half an hour to fix it. So that's a real win. And the people who are normally speaking to the customers can't make that decision. And so they've got 100 things they want doing, and like half of them are really big, so it never gets anywhere. But exposing your developers to that, they can do quick win, and then quickly do those and improve it. So that if you don't know the name of the company that does that. No, okay.
So it's not about making all your developers unicorns and UX specialists. It's about spreading that understanding throughout the team so that we understand why the button has to be in that shade of blue and on this part of the screen, and why the flow works like that, even though I personally feel it should work a different way because that's how my development IDE tools work. And it's just that empathy that the developers also need.
I think the UX people might be getting upset that you keep saying they basically color buttons and place them on a screen, Sam. That is what you do, right?
Thanks. I'd like to iterate what you just said. What we do is when we write our stories or tickets or whatever you want to call them, we provide context to why that thing needs to be done, so that the developer didn't necessarily get involved in meeting the user, but they've got a context. What is the pain that this user is feeling? Why is it like that? And why are we doing the story in this way? So they then understand the bigger picture, and I think that's where she was lacking, in that she doesn't know what the bigger picture is. And normally the product owner or the product manager has that information, but is not sharing it freely with her, so she feels lost. And by providing that, it is more onerous on the product owner or the product manager, but it provides a better solution at the end, because your developers or the people that are doing the work actually empathize with what needs to happen.
We often see people just lose the why, and people are doing stuff because they were told what to do, but if you go back to the why every single time, you'll get a better result. I completely agree.
You said something earlier about that you don't have to start with the bigger picture because you don't really know what it is in any case. Can you just elaborate on that practically? And I'm asking as a product manager rather than a UX.
What type of product do you work on? Publishing.
Yeah.
Perfect. Tell the story about our books, Sam.
Okay, so we've published about 5 books now, self-published, so not through a publishing house. But here's a little example of how we went through the process. So we knew we wanted to publish a book. We knew more or less that the topic was going to be collaboration games, and it would be games that people could play with their teams. We didn't know how long it was going to be. We didn't know how it would look or anything like that.
We didn't know if there was a market for it.
We didn't know if there was a market. So we wrote up 3, and we put it in a book, and we just drew a cover for it, and we published it for free.
And we tried out the technology we were using at the same time, which was LeanPub.
Yeah, on LeanPub. So we did it in a day, put 3 games up in a day, and immediately started getting feedback, especially from friends, because we'd sent them the links. And the feedback was it was really valuable, but it would be nice to see how long the exercises would take and how many people they were valid for. So we changed those 3 that we had in there to have icons with time and how many people, and we added a 4th one. And we published. 2nd day. Then we got feedback that it's really cool, but the cover looks crap.
Our designer told us the cover sucked.
She called us and told us
she asked
what
if she
the
could
hell.
do a nicer one.
So she did a pretty cover, and we published. So this is day 3. And then we started noticing all of a sudden people were downloading it. So we got up to like 100 downloads.
Oh, and it was free at this point as well.
Yeah. So we're like, okay, well, let's add a few more and make it 10 and leave it at that and see what happens. So we made it 10 and published, and I think this was day 5. Really, this was like 1 week. And after about a month, we'd had like 500 downloads, so we changed the price to $5. Or to, if you wanted to, you can take it free, or you can pay, the recommended price was $5. And people started paying. So they could take it free, or they could pay, and they started paying.
And then a guy contacted us and said, please, can I translate your book to Spanish? And we went, okay. And it turns out there's a huge market for Agile books in Spanish because nobody writes them in Spanish. So we got as many downloads of the Spanish version as we got of the English version in like half the time. We had no idea there was a Spanish market for our books.
So do you see?
We had a book in 1 day. It wasn't the final book, but we had a book in 1 day, and people started using it.
So it's being able to really think differently about how you're going to work and how you're going to get feedback. We weren't attached to the book idea. We were like, well, if it fails, 1 day's work. Well, if it fails, 2 days' work. And then after a week, we're like, right, that's enough time wasted. Now we need to go get paying work.
And now we've written enough books that we've made $10,000 on book royalties, and that's not even what we do as a living. So that's just a side project that we decided on 1 day. So,
At the back. Oh dear.
run, Sam, run. I brought my own mic. It's built in.
So I think your example is cool, but the challenge when it comes to enterprise, thank you, in enterprise stuff, is that like I'm saying, we work for Standard Bank, and it's people's money. I can't put something out that's going to fail, right? It's people's real money, so it has to be something that has to work. And I've also got a set of functionality that needs to be almost complete before it can be something that a person can use to run their business or to run their lives and all of those things. And the other challenge is also that to ship that thing, I may have to go through a testing cycle that's not like weeks. It could be, sometimes it's weeks, but 6 weeks or 13 weeks or whatever it is, just to go from the point where the developer stopped writing code through all the money transfer testing and all of that kind of stuff. That's where kind of Agile gets really difficult. If your definition of done is we only know when it's done, when it's in the market and real people are using it, those are some of the other challenges. And I don't know if you've got a view on that or experience around that.
So, you're probably not going to like what I have to say. Agile is really, really, really hard in that situation because you're trying to do Agile in a big corporate organization that's all set up for waterfall.
Can't fail.
And you can't fail. And you can't learn from your mistakes. It is really difficult. And there is no magic answer. There's no blue pill or red pill that's going to make that easier for you. To do what we're talking about requires a mind shift set at the organizational level, which is why there are so few companies that do this really, really well. But it is possible. It's just not possible for everyone. Sorry.
But I just want to talk one point. If you can't release to market, so Scrum talks about potentially shippable. Can you release to friends and co-workers? Can you release your banking product to the employees of F&B? I'm assuming you're F&B. I'm just making that up because they need some help. Hate their website. Yeah. Okay. But can you release it to a subset of users that if something horribly goes wrong, it doesn't damage your brand? And can you at least iterate there with real people using the product? I worked for a long time at Fundamo, also financial products, and unfortunately I never got them to do this, but the idea was let's open a Fundamo shop. We have the little guy who sells us sandwiches, he'll be on the Fundamo platform and we'll buy stuff via our mobile phones from him, and if the system sucks and doesn't work, we'll know because we're using it ourselves. So maybe that's something you can try. Can you be using it yourselves if brand reputation is such a terrible thing? It's one idea. And I've been told we have to wrap up because you all want to eat. We may have time for one question? No, we don't have time for one question. You can find us in lunch to ask your question. You can run with me on Sunday, Maritza, and ask me your question.
Okay, I will.
Thanks, everyone.
Guys, just one last.